So, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Long Road Back, a podcast series all about helping athletes go through that process of injury recovery, to give athletes a voice, but ultimately to help people feel less alone during their injury journey. And I'm absolutely delighted to say my guest today is someone I have a very strong relationship with, and we actually, just before coming on air, actually talking about the fact that we used to play rugby against each other, and we were reminiscing about some of our memories there. So it's a good job we actually started to click record. So my guest today is someone who played for Dorking RFC in that too. I've played for them since the age of 6. Played representative rugby for Surrey men's before going to Leeds Beckett University, where he played for the first 15 in Bucks Super Rugby, and actually was named captain throughout his time there. Whilst that's an impressive CV in itself, the core of this episode and kind of the theme of this episode is what you're going to tell by the title will be all about concussions and kind of that hidden side of injury. As my guest today, someone who's actually created a platform to help athletes deal with the symptoms of concussion. I will let them kind of explain their journey in a second. But so on a personal level, I was really excited to have this guest on because I've followed their journey for a while, and as someone who has had concussions themselves, I really resonated with what they worked with. So, Barney, thank you so much for being here today. You know, I think it's been a lot of people when I say I'm quite impressed by that. First, the rugby journey, but also I'd love to hear more about how that led to you kind of starting this, concussion page.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. First of all, it's a real pleasure, and I love what you're doing as well. It's so important to share the awareness around injury and longer term injury for athletes and anyone really, because I mean, athletes specifically, injuries are inevitable when you're playing at a certain level, and not just in supporting athletes with injury, but when you're aware of what injuries and tough injuries can be like as an athlete, you can sort of prepare yourself. So yeah, I love what you're doing, and it's absolutely a pleasure to be on. So how did I sort of get to where I am? As you sort of explained on you made it sound very impressive CV. I'm not sure it is super impressive, but thank you. Yeah, I played rugby all my life, and I think I had about 20 odd concussions from about the age of 13 to 23 that I can sort of look back and identify now. Probably not super unusual for most rugby players and contact sport athletes, but they started to affect me quite badly towards the sort of back end of my career, my short career. In the last couple of years, I was playing and living with symptoms on and off for the majority of that last couple of years. And yeah, I had about 5 concussions in the space of a year, and eventually had to retire. I then went through about a 2-year period of struggling with symptoms, going from specialist to specialist, trying to work out how to sort of fix my post-concussion syndrome puzzle, I suppose. And yeah, it took me a long time, spent a lot of money, and yeah, suffered really badly with quite bad depression and all the other sort of stuff that goes along with that. But eventually got better, started an Instagram page to raise awareness, stop people making the same mistakes I made. But then that's now transpired into me actually helping people one-to-one. And it's now my full-time career, which is bonkers to say. But yeah, that's me, and that's how I'm where I am today, I suppose.
I mean, I have to admit, before we even kind of get on anything else, I was going to say the 20 concussions took me, kind of blew me away. And this isn't a disrespect to you, but I then thought about it and went, oh, hang on. For my rugby journey, that's not ridiculous to say that's happened. And again, I think, and we'll come on to this, but weirdly, that's not a negative. So it's not a negative. It's not like we're dismissing people's concussions. It's actually more of a commentary on just how widespread concussions are in rugby. We were chatting off air just before. I was describing kind of my concussion journey, and some of my friends, and 20 is not ridiculous, because I think when we think back, there must have been so many that were just kind of ignored. So listen, so I'd be interested to take, as you kind of started this page, or initially, as you began initially starting the page, was there something that kind of stood out really quickly initially from starting the page, or was there something that really stood out to you when starting it?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, what's led me to start the career I've started, like initially I started the page just to raise a bit of awareness and just see where I could go with social media, because it's so prevalent these days, and I think everyone should be on social media in some sort of capacity for their career. But yeah, I'd started the page, and I just couldn't believe how many people were reaching out asking for advice. And it was people playing rugby, people just in normal walks of life that have fallen over and hit their head on a lamppost, for example. It was like, and I just couldn't believe it. And That then made me start doing, or led to me doing more research and trying to get a bit of a better understanding for just how many concussions there are a year. So one quite staggering fact is there's 1.5 million confirmed concussions in A&E per year in the UK alone. And that's probably excluding most athletes, because most athletes will get assessed by a physio and then get told, oh, it's concussion, go rest for a couple of weeks. And I know that's definitely true with rugby. Like, most physios will assess and go, okay, it's not a serious concussion, you don't need to go to an A&E, and then it won't get reported. So that is a staggering figure. And yeah, but in relation to just the social media side of things and the Instagram side of things, I just couldn't believe how many people. Mate, sorry, someone's just interrupted.
That's all right.
It's a homeless man.
Ask me what's the views on concussion.
I'm probably
honestly, don't worry.
probably taking a call next to his bedroom. So yeah. Anyway.
Mate, don't worry. It's all right.
Bless him. Anyway, yeah. So where was I? Yeah, I just thought it was quite staggering how many people were reaching out to me asking for advice, and I wasn't giving out anywhere near the level of advice I'm giving out now, or guidance I'm giving out now, as I've sort of upskilled myself. So yeah, that's probably the one thing. It was just the sheer number of people that are actually affected by concussion, and that word concussion being thrown about quite sort of willy-nilly these days. But yeah,
that must be quite scary almost. So you naturally are happy these people have a platform to speak to. I can imagine that being quite intimidating. Like, almost that, oh wow, there are so many people out here who not, like, some might have been worse, some better, but even so, that they've also suffered the same as me. So it must be quite hard to deal with.
Yeah, definitely. And part of the difficulty is actually reliving my own trauma. Certainly initially I had to be very aware of that, or I wasn't aware of it, I should say, and how much that affected me, and helping people go through some of the things that I went through. I was basically reliving everything I went through with the mental health side of things. And I mean, I spent 6 months sort of every time I went to bed thinking that I wasn't going to wake up in the morning because my symptoms were so bad. So yeah, that was tough. But in relation to other people and how it's quite scary, I've had a few conversations now, or a number of conversations now, with people living with CTE, people living with more serious concussions that have really affected them in very serious ways physically, losing speech, going completely mad, probably for want for a better phrase, but losing their mind. And yeah, it's just really sad. And it's a whole nother debate, and it's a whole nother topic that we probably shouldn't really get into on today's talk. I mean, I'm happy to do so if you want to, but like the whole CTE side of things, and how potentially governing bodies have let people down, and how preventable that disease is. That's really sad and quite striking. But yeah, also just like when you realise that there's always risk involved with all sport, but especially something like rugby or other contact sports. I mean, some people just get really unlucky. And I'm not sat here saying that rugby is too dangerous to play. I'm not sat here saying that people should give up their sport, any contact sport. There's so many benefits to rugby and other contact sports. I've travelled the world because of rugby, and I wouldn't change anything in my career other than understanding the injury better so I could heal better and get myself back to being in a position where I could play before I return to the field. But some people just get unlucky and are put into really, really horrible positions, and their life is changed forever sometimes. So that's scary. But ultimately it's a very, very slim chance for most people. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's something worth talking about. And I think that, again, whilst my podcast is, again, across all sports, and it addresses injuries as themes across sports rather than, kind of vice versa. But for me, this is so important to talk about. It's actually the reason I wanted to do this podcast more than anything was that because rugby is so personal to me. Rugby was my sport growing up. It was my sport that I played the highest level at. It's my sport again, like you said. It's how we travel the world. All my best friends are from rugby. Well, I think I got jobs from rugby, and I think it's that I wouldn't change a thing about rugby. It's built the foundation of who I am, the way I respect people, the way I, hard working. I think it instills the kind of true meaning of what resilience is and discipline, and in a way, in a team sport, in a working team environment, in a way that, again, I can only speak for rugby, and lots of other sports, but in a way that I know that some other sports don't necessarily, or some other aspects of life don't. But, and there is an important but, that the older I've got and the more I've looked back at my rugby, I wouldn't change playing, but you make such a good point when you say you change the awareness, is that it almost gives players that choice to know, okay, I'm informed now. And I think something I just want to pick on when you said earlier was that concussion was almost this buzzword that's kind of thrown around, and you were almost stunned by how many people were just throwing it around. So I'm interested, kind of want to expand on that, and how maybe what you've seen, and how often you've almost seen people say, "Oh yeah, I've been concussed," as if it was almost quite a easy dismissible thing.
Yeah, so I think the way to sort of frame this and explain it best is the amount of people that will message me and say, "Oh, I've just had a small bump to the head, or I've had a small head knock, or I've got a small concussion." There's no small or big concussion. There's worse effects, and you can have a really big hit to the head that could possibly cause a worse injury, and you can have symptoms for longer. But I wouldn't say that there's a way that we can look at a head knock, which is probably the worst way of putting it, because it just downplays what it is. It's a minor traumatic brain injury. Like you're hitting your head, or you're hitting your body, and you're having such force put through your brain that it's shaking your brain, and there's chemical reactions that happen. There's a massive energy deficit. There's a massive energy surge. And then your brain is in this really delicate position where if it gets hit again, or if you don't look after yourself properly, neurons can die. And it's very hard to replace those neurons. I don't think you can replace the exact neuron that dies, but there's neuroplasticity and there's neuroregeneration and all that sort of stuff. But that's very difficult to do. Anyway, the point is, it's a minor traumatic brain injury, and that's downplayed massively in sport. And so going back to the point about having 20 concussions in my career, yeah, it's a pretty usual thing. But what would allow me to probably still be playing now is if I had the awareness, my coaches had the awareness, physios had the proper awareness that it is a serious injury. You need to take the time off. There's a reason we have the 21-day protocol. 21 days is the amount of times it takes for that energy deficit and the chemical reaction to correct itself again. And then your brain's not in a delicate state anymore. So yeah, it's massively downplayed. And if I was given the awareness and the people around me were given the awareness, I probably would still be playing now, and I'd happily still be playing now. I wouldn't be scared of the sport. I wouldn't be scared of getting a singular concussion again. But yeah, I would have just taken it way more seriously. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm so glad you said that, because again, this podcast addresses every sport, but this episode will specifically be targeting, focusing on rugby and these contact sports today. I think a lot of them get it wrong, and I can't necessarily speak for specifics and give quantitative examples, but I know that I've been in environments where weakness was frowned upon, where you had to be the toughest, you had to constantly be bigger, stronger, faster, you had to keep working harder. And this idea that I was almost less of a man, I was less of a rugby player, and even the position I played, I was up front in the forward pack, which meant that physicality, collisions, that was my entire game. I think very similar for yourself. It's like the idea that if any point I said this idea, you know what, I'm not feeling right, I'm not feeling weak, I wasn't even just like, not necessarily addressed, but it was almost frowned upon. It wasn't even just the middle ground, it was the negative. And
yeah,
I know that something I've struggled with, and speaking to more athletes in their own kind of sport, that for running it can translate into just mentioning that you're not feeling quite right health-wise, and you're frowned upon, or if you weren't quite getting the reps correctly. But for rugby and concussions, these are brain injuries. So I'm interested to hear kind of your experience of whether that's happened to you, and then whether maybe you've heard from other people, is that something that maybe people who come speak to you have also addressed concern about?
Yeah, to be honest, so it's quite funny. Like, coming from rugby and coming from that environment, when you're in that bubble, you're taught that you have to tough it out and you have to be tough. And there is an element of that. You have to be tough to play rugby. I'll argue with anyone on the planet that rugby players are probably some of the toughest people alive. Like, you look at like people like Tom Curry, for example. And for anyone who doesn't know rugby,
that came to my head as well. Best name that came to my head as well.
Yeah. If anyone who doesn't know rugby, Tom Curry is, I'd say he's up there, top 10 hardest blokes on the planet. The man, he's just a freak. And so you have to be, I mean, to be that level, you have to be that tough and in that position.
He's got a metal hip, isn't he?
Yeah, and I mean, did you hear about him on the Lions tour?
Yeah.
So the Lions tour, he snapped a ligament in his wrist, and then he didn't have the ligament for the whole of the Lions tour because he had to have surgery to get it fixed. So if he had surgery, he couldn't go on the Lions tour. And again, for anyone who doesn't know what the Lions tour is, I think they're there for like 2 months, aren't they? And they play an X amount of games. And he was involved in all 3 test matches. The guy's a freak. Anyway, so yeah, you have to be tough. I understand that, and that's why the nature of that environment is the way it is. Like, you have to install that ability to go through pain. And you know, I played on injuries throughout my whole career, and I don't think any rugby player playing at a decent level is ever 100% fit throughout the season. So that's fine, and I appreciate that. And actually, I quite enjoyed that. I quite enjoyed the pain. I enjoyed waking up on a Sunday or on a Thursday when I was playing at uni, feeling completely broken in so many ways, because it's satisfaction and you know you've done a good job, and that's fine. I don't think that's unhealthy. Where we have to draw the line with concussion is understanding that all of those injuries you get, you can have scans, you can have assessments done, you know if you've broken a bone, you know how much time you need to take off. You know, like it's obvious. It's a matter of weeks, and then you're back, and once you're back, you know you're safe to be playing again. With your brain, there's no scan that we can do to determine whether you're concussed or not, because it's too minute and it's not structural. It's functional, so it's chemicals and it's energy in your brain. So you can't have a scan, and then you can't also do an assessment of how long it's going to take for your symptoms to go away, and then you're safe to play again. That's why we have the standard protocol of 21 days, because that's the average amount of time and the maximum amount of time that it takes for that energy deficit to correct itself. So I think with rugby and other contact sports, yes, we need to be tough. And it's so valuable to be able to be tough and be able to go through pain. I mean, that transfers into life. Life is tough. Like, things happen all the time, that obstacles and things hit you all the time in life, and you have to be able to deal with those things. And I think rugby is a massive, is a really good way of learning how to deal with tough things in your life. But when it comes to your brain, you have to take it seriously, because it doesn't heal in the way that everything else heals. And if you do enough damage, it's really, really hard to reverse that. Really, really difficult, and sometimes impossible. So yeah, from my experience, I've had a number of occasions, well, probably throughout my whole career, where physios have let me down. And it's not the physio's fault, because the physios don't get the education. It's the governing bodies and the stakeholders involved that are trying to protect the game rather than the players, which is a very interesting topic that we could talk for a very long time about.
I think it's important we do address this, but just briefly. And I think that, like you said, the physio's letting you down, because even as you were saying that, I know there were times we chatted briefly off air about this as well, but I know I have been let down before, and I'm very happy that I then took the step away. I made the agency choice, probably because I have friends around me who suffered so badly with concussions. I knew that even if there was that element of doubt, sit them out. I had to go. Take it about. And I think for people not listening, for people not listening, for people listening, people not aware of the situation, in rugby at the moment, if I'm not mistaken, and do correct me if I'm wrong, this is more from my own knowledge, that there's a current kind of head case scenario going on in the background to do with Steve Thompson, who's a 2003 World Cup winner. He's not the only one involved. There's plenty of players involved. Probably the most high profile. He's now had some issues with concussion. I don't know the exact symptoms again, and I do encourage people to look up for themselves after, and have a look at it. But essentially, it's the idea that certain players from sport are suing and the governing bodies of rugby. I don't know. I'm not sure there's RFU or rugby, but this idea that that's ongoing. And I think for a lot of people, if that case ends up winning or settles or whatever happens, first and foremost, it's brought concussion to the absolute forefront of the conversation. And as that's going on in the background, there's more and more coming out in the present day. So Ben Youngs has released that podcast. I can't quite remember the exact name of the podcast is. You probably, I imagine you've probably seen it. The Ben Youngs and Nancy Watson concussion documentary. It just kind of appears that concussion, quite right, I'm so glad it is kind of rearing its head more and more. And I think it's presented a real challenge for rugby. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on A, where that kind of case is going, and B, what you thought of that Ben Youngs documentary, because I was quite in awe watching it.
Yeah, it's so this is a big can of worms.
Yeah.
So I don't really know where to start. I'd say, so first of all, the litigation issue. So there's over 1,000 ex-professional players now suing the RFU or World Rugby. I'm not sure if it's the RFU or World Rugby or collective. And the idea is that rugby and the lack of care taken by the stakeholders involved and the governing bodies has led to over 1,000 players and probably more having long-term irreversible head injury, head problems, brain issues, some degenerative diseases like CTE, and some with functional neurological disorders. So yeah, it's quite a messy thing. My opinion is I think that they have a leg to stand on massively. I think the RFU were irresponsible in their approach to concussion when the game turned professional and long after that. We've known about CTE for over 100 years. Like it's nothing new, and there were protocols in place for physios and doctors involved with rugby in the 1970s that were saying that we need to have 3 weeks rest after a concussion, and that then got very murky as the game went on and as the game went professional. And I think that's where people have been let down. I think the governing bodies should have done better and done more. And I don't want to talk too much on that to sort of, like it sort of puts me in the wrong spotlight, because that's not the battle I'm necessarily fighting.
I understand. Yeah, for sure.
in the open. But what happens from that, what goes from that goes from that. And I hope these players, because I've had a glimpse into what the longer term issues might feel like. I had some really, really bad symptoms when I was at my worst, and I think I had a real good view on what having dementia might feel like, and it's absolutely fucking terrifying. I was in a position where I could heal, so I found it terrifying, and I knew I was getting better. So some of these guys that have got degenerative diseases, and they know it's not going to get better, it's only going to get worse from here on out potentially, and you can deal with symptoms and you can manage symptoms, but ultimately they're just getting worse over time. So that's terrifying, and it's wrong, and it's when someone's responsible, then it's wrong, and if the players weren't responsible, then that's unfair on them, I suppose, is probably the best way to put it.
Oh, yes, that's a good description. I agree with you. I think that's a really good description.
Yeah. So yeah, can of worms, but look, I think the way the game's going to change and needs to change is that we need to have more than just a 21-day protocol and a HIA assessment at games when someone gets a head knock. I mean, like, that's not even working. You look at on the weekend. I'm going to release a post this week, I think, about it. But George Furbank got a massive bang to the face. His eye was pissing claret all over the place. Sorry,
absolutely cooked.
Oh, and
yeah,
and the other guy's got his teeth caved in, and so for Furbank, I don't know if he even went off for a HIA. I don't know, but he was back playing with his face was out here, and then you've got the other guy on the bench, and the guy was subbed off for his teeth. I think it was just claret, and so then he's gone off, and he wasn't subbed off for HIA for concussion reasons. How are we in a position now with rugby where we still aren't taking these players and giving them HIAs? How is that possible with everything we now know? Like,
I just want to pick on something you said. Sorry to interrupt you, but mentioning the HIA protocols was that I know, and again, this isn't necessarily targeting anyone individually. However, I know that when I had concussions, when I remember playing Durham University, smack on the head, big flash of white light, had memory issues the next day, was calling a 5-man lineup, calling a 6-man, wasn't that. And yeah, I did the HIA, passed with flying colours. I did. Yeah. I remember that, again, the second one was the second idea. It was when I had my third concussion in about 5 months, which meant I had to have 5 months out. I think it's like 5.5 months out. But every single HIA I passed, because weirdly enough, clearly, even when I was in concussed state or not, I could repeat 6 words back to you, or I could say that the months in reverse. And you know what? I saw in that, and again, to touch on here, the documentary, I think Anthony Watson came out and said that in that Lions test that he knew that, whether it was himself, I'm not quite sure, but he knew the questions already. And he knew that if one person's done it in rugby, there's an incredibly strong chance that a lot of other people have done it. Yeah. Which is why the Gary Ringrose scenario, I assume you probably would have seen this during the Lions tour. Yeah. Such a breath of fresh air, because obviously I think we can talk forever so much about the negative side, and quite rightly the negative side needs to be addressed. But what made me so happy was that there was some glimpses of progress. And I saw that. Yeah. I'm sure you'd have thought the same there.
Oh yeah, and do you know what? Like, absolute credit to Ringrose. Like, first of all, what a clever bloke. What a self-aware human being he must be to make that decision. He's playing, and like, for anyone who doesn't know, the Lions is the pinnacle of all world rugby. Players will either want to be on a Lions tour and dream of the Lions tour, or dream of playing against the Lions tour. And Ringrose would have been dreaming that for his whole life, his whole rugby career, as long as he's known rugby. And he's at the point where he's got the opportunity to play in a test. And that is it's the greatest honour you can get. And he's pulled himself out because of concussion issues. That's just unbelievably, it's just amazing from him. And it's, for me, the thing that sort of stood out there was how ridiculous I was for thinking how important playing for Leeds Beckett on a Wednesday night was, and how I should be, but like, what if I don't get selected next week? Or, I'm missing out on a chance to play. This is the pinnacle, this is pinnacle for me. It's like, well, bollocks. Like, it means nothing ultimately when it comes to your health. Your health is so much more important, because there's a life outside of rugby. And I wish I'd known that, and I wish I'd seen that when I was playing. But yeah, it's so commendable and amazing from him. But also Manny Faye-Waboso as well. He did it the year before, 2 years before, playing for England. Yeah. And again, like, the honour that he was getting for getting, it's early on in his career. He's still, I think he's only on like 10 caps for England. So to have the self-awareness and the bravery to make that decision himself is amazing and commendable as well. And funnily enough, he's a doctor, so he probably actually understands the risks a bit better than most people. Or he's a trainee doctor anyway. Yeah. To then answer your question about the documentary. So it's good in a way. It's shedding a bit of light, but actually what it has done, what it does do is downplay concussion in a number of ways, because at one point Ben Youngs goes and gets a brain scan. He just got an MRI. MRI doesn't show concussion, doesn't show anything. So MRIs will show, again, it shows the structure of your brain, but it doesn't show, first of all, doesn't show what, if you've had a concussion there and then, it won't show a concussion because it's so minute. But also, even if you've got longer term damage and you've got lesions on the brain or whatever it might be, again, an MRI doesn't show that. You need an fMRI, which is more in-depth MRI, and you need other tests. So the documentary was good, and it gave Steve Thompson a chance to talk about his issues. It gave Alex Popham, another lad who ex-international Welsh rugby player. He's got CTE or a probable CTE, and they gave him a chance to talk. But then they also cut his interview short. They didn't really give him any airtime. They had it was an interview with a man called Sam Peters, who wrote the book Concussed, which is basically the first whistleblower on concussion in rugby. They had a full interview with him. I know him personally, and they cut that interview out and they didn't show it. And I know he would have been shedding more light and giving better information than that was on the documentary. So yeah, it's great that we're taking steps, but I still, to be honest, feel like that was controlled by the RFU and controlled by World Rugby, what was actually put out. And it wasn't enough. And it's just sort of to please the masses and go, oh, look, concussion's a thing. We're looking after it. You don't need to worry about it. It's okay. It's being looked after. But it's not. And ultimately, the changes we need to make are better HIAs, as we've just sort of shed a light on. I passed every HIA I ever had. I was and the reason for that is, if you want to get scientific and technical, if you hit your brain and you rattle your brain about and you have a concussion and the energy deficit and the part of the brain that might be affected might not be the part that's you need to do the test. So we need to have tests where you test every single thing. So like every part that your brain controls. So you need manual testing, you need memory testing, you need reactive testing, all of it. You need to encompass it all. And I don't know about you, but all my HIAs were, again, it was like the memory stuff. And I remember playing against Nottingham for Leeds Beckett, and I got knocked out in the first 2 minutes. I sort of came back around, got onto my knees, and physio's come over. I won't name him because there's no point, but he's come over and he's going, oh, is it your neck? And I'm like, mate, no, like, it's obviously my head. And then he's going, okay, where are you? And I'm looking around and there's Nottingham barriers. So I've just gone Nottingham. And then he goes, what's the score? I can see the scoreboard behind him. It's like 0-0. It's the first 2 minutes. He goes, what's the time? Again, I can see the time on the scoreboard. It's like 2 minutes in. So, and then he's like, yeah, you're fine, go and play. And then I went off and we had a line out, attacking line out. And my 10 was asking me what the move was, what the call was. And apparently I was just looking through him like he wasn't saying anything to me. And then I just wasn't reacting. And then 30 seconds later, I go, oh, what's the move, Alex? So I evidently was concussed and I was completely out of it. And I mean, getting knocked out is if you get knocked out, you are concussed. It's a fact. Like, there's no concussion without getting knocked out. Or sorry, the other way around. There's no getting knocked out without concussion. But there's also, on that point as well, while I'm rambling on, it's 90% of concussions don't involve a knockout. So you don't need to be knocked out, and that's a common misconception. People are like, "Oh, I didn't get knocked out, so it can't be that bad." So no, it's bollocks. Like if you have any symptoms, you've got a concussion. So yeah. So I rambled on a bit there.
No. I'm so glad you said that because we can dance around it, but ultimately there is nothing brave and nothing impressive about playing through concussion. And I'm sorry, there's not. And like, as you mentioned earlier, yes, there's certain things in certain sports that we can almost not say push through pain, but like, hey, I know my shoulder's sore, but I'm going to work out. I'm going to keep working after my teammates, and sometimes it goes away. But obviously, in other sports, sometimes it gets worse and you can't play anymore. Fine, that's a kind of slightly different issue. But concussions are different, though. Different kettle of fish. And as you were saying that, I was sitting there thinking about. We chatted briefly about this off air. Again, that physio comes on the field. Actually, we may well have been at the exact same ground, actually, against Nottingham. And again, I'm there. You can see in the video, I made the tackle. I hold my head. I'm walking off, rubbing my head. Again, none of my family members were there, because I know for a fact if some of my family's there, and probably similar to yourself, it's like they would have spotted that. They go, well, he's not right. He comes off.
Yeah.
And it's like, goodness me, it's a game of rugby. And I remember the physio, again, I can't remember how much I explained this earlier, but so I did it. He went, look, okay, we'll get you to half time, we'll get you back on, see how you feel. I was like, are you serious? How is this happening? And of course, I don't know how to say it. You don't want to say it's all your fault, because there is some degree of personal agency. Of course there is. No one's denying that. However, and there's an enormous however, they are in that position of power in this case. We trust them. They are the experts.
Yeah.
And I don't need to read a number of statistics, because I know from my own experiences right now, and from what you've told me here, and what I know from my friends, that misinformation and to keep complete opposite. It's scary, because ultimately, there were some clear limitations to the documentary. At least saying it's the one thing it did get show. It did show people like Steve Thompson talking of this. So I'm going to sit in my home. One choice from a physio, one choice to not take it seriously, quite literally ruin someone's life. And I don't mean in a, oh, you can't play rugby. I mean, you are going to inherit, well, not saying inherit, but I know exactly what it is. You're going to develop incredible symptoms. And I think, as you said, we love rugby. I watch it all the time. I love it. But I do see some of these collisions now, and I think to myself, how the hell is that person still on the field? And I think it's scary. I think just to kind of come to the end, I think it's personal. It's personal for you, and it's personal for me. Even more so for you, given your career you're in now and speaking to these people. But even as someone who I like to think I've generally recovered from my symptoms, I mentioned to you earlier that I actually know that for the rest of my career, following even before my foot injuries and shoulder surgeries again, that I wasn't right. I wasn't the same. And I think to come to the end, you mentioned something about Gary Ringrose again, and then we talked about it. I think what his story shows is the importance of role models. And I think that what I really liked about the documentary was that, it touched on it briefly, but it didn't quite show all of it. That I just felt that in that documentary, what a chance they had to go, show the likes of Ringrose that, yes, while there is this huge negative side, this is what rugby is doing. Because there is like, the more we educate these players, and the more we educate, especially the kids, the younger kids, when the collisions start getting a bit higher, when you enter that sixth form, range, I just think the role models are so important. I think that, I'm kind of interested here to you, do you think social media had any impact on the kind of concussion world? And then if it has any impact, maybe what would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably just more of that, isn't it? It's getting the right role models into the limelight. And I think where rugby needs to change is that we need to have an understanding that you don't need to change the sport in its essence. You don't need to change the physicality that we all love. And there's going to be an acceptance of you've got a chance of getting concussion. That no one's denying that. I'm not denying. If I could play rugby, I'd play tomorrow. I just can't, because if I make one tackle, exactly. But I can't, because if I get honestly, if I tackle someone, jump my shoulder, no head involved, I get symptoms, and that's basically what's happened. So, I would play tomorrow if I could. But what we need to do, I think the governing bodies are terrified of concussion, and they're terrified of actually just looking into it. Because as soon as you look into it and you start making genuine changes, that's almost accepting that there's an issue. And so we sort of need this litigation thing to go through and for the players to win. So then you have to make the change. And I don't think it's going to be the end of rugby. I think that's what the governing bodies are seeing it as. And I think maybe a lot of people that are involved in the sport are seeing it as it could just be the end of rugby. It's not the end of rugby. We'll adapt. Too many people love playing it. I love playing it, even though it took probably 2 years of my life away from me. I love it, and I wouldn't change the actual nature of it. You're always going to have people wanting to play. You're always going to have that. So it's not going to die. It's just we need to look after people. It's not just this, we could do more. It's you have to look after people better, because it's not acceptable for people to end up like Steve Thompson. And it's not acceptable for people to end up like the thousands more that are involved in this litigation thing. And that's those players are probably the only ones that are brave enough to actually step forward. I think you're missing out on a number of people that just don't want to damage the game, and they don't want compensation. They just want to go about it in their own way. That doesn't mean that they're not still affected. I guarantee. I'm a strong believer that you've got all these players from probably 2000, well, since the game went professional till probably 2018, 2019, and even now, even players still playing now. We talked about Tom Curry. Guy, I mean, how many tackles that man made in his career? How many carries that man made in his career? Look at the state of his actual physical body that you can see. What do you think his brain's going to be going through? You know, and I love Tom Curry. I think he's a brilliant player, and I hope he's getting looked after the way he should be. But it's yeah, things need to happen. Things need to change. You know, things need to change. But it's not going to be the end of rugby. It's just the evolution of the game. It's just an evolution of the game. That's all it is.
I agree, and I think just to end on here, it's like that. Because for so many injured athletes, and I can speak kind of more broadly here to the injured athlete across all sports, is that it's not a choice. Injured athletes don't choose to get injured. They don't choose to dislocate their shoulder or have a concussion or do these things. They're not. That doesn't take away their love of the sport. I think all the injured athletes I've spoken to, the hardest thing, or one of the hardest things about injury, isn't the physical pain. It's the fact they can't do what they wanted to do. And I imagine it's so much similar in your world. Is that and again, that just, more than anything, again, alongside the fact that the feelings of grief and guilt that incredibly hard to deal with, the love of the sport doesn't change, or at the very least, it's still there. And that shows again that it's not for me. It's hard when athletes are the ones who are targeted by this. You played the sport, that's your fault, and the sense the guilt is on you. And again, that doesn't help the guilt that's already being processed by the athletes who are already thinking the same thing. So what I loved hearing you say there was that it's so much about the awareness that empower the people in charge, the coaches, whether even first of all, it's the players, then the coaches and whatnot. Educate them and keep them aware. So when these injuries come about, and whether it's concussion or whether it's a dislocated knee or a shoulder, whatever it is that they almost have that control back. And I think when you push that guilt, onto the players, it becomes really hard. And just a final question, I just thought of it. I can probably imagine the kind of direction you go in with this. Just kind of very briefly, if there's kind of one piece of advice you kind of give to your younger self, in your case probably is when you maybe had that first concussion symptom. I know I'm probably a question I imagine you've had in your thought of in your mind before, but if there's kind of one piece of advice or a quote or something, anything that you kind of tell your younger self that, you know, at the beginning of your concussion journey, remember, what would that look like?
You have so much time in your career if you look after yourself properly. And so taking the time to recover from that concussion is not going to stop you playing. It's not going to stop you progressing to the level you want to progress to. So take the time. Just take the time to get yourself better. And I'd still be playing now if I had that advice.
Well, thanks. Honestly, Barney, thank you so much for coming on. I think I speak to a lot of people again, I know this is probably the most narrow episode I've done, but it meant a lot to me because I always wanted to do it for my own experience, because I think concussions link so directly to my own page's idea of the hidden part of injury. And it's something that I think social media gets so wrong, and translating that to rugby, the governing bodies get wrong. I think that hearing people like you talk about role models, this is perfect. I think for so many kids, and you mentioned there that what's something they wish they'd heard, all it takes sometimes is to know that someone else has been in your shoes. All it takes is to know, like for me, I saw ringroads and I remember thinking I missed out on a big game for Bath, for the Wreckers of my shoulder. I missed out on these other big things. I was like, oh, hang on, this guy, the peak of his powers, probably the peak of the deciding test in the Lions series in Australia. And he's starting, and he chose to step away. So I just want to say a massive, massive thank you for coming on first and foremost, but secondly, for just promoting your page. And I'll make sure all the information will be hopefully below. I do really encourage, even if concussions aren't your sport, even if you aren't necessarily as prevalent in your sport, do have a look, because I think we'd be surprised. I think we can learn so much from other sports. and the kind of things they go through. So, Barney, thanks so much, and I wish you all the best with your platform moving forward.
Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate it. Absolute pleasure.
Cheers.